Steve is the GIS manager for Pima County, Pima County GIS. He's AGIC Chair 2020, AGIC Conference Committee Co-Chair, APLS Geospatial Committee Chair. Mr. Whitney, Steve, has been in the GIS profession since 1988, starting as a college intern when Pima County was first establishing their GIS. He currently manages the team that is responsible for supporting enterprise GIS applications, including the management of the county's GIS library, development and maintenance of web mapping applications, GIS hardware and software administration, GIS data dissemination, 911 support, and GIS software vendor relations. His specialties include GIS project management, geospatial data processing and analysis, image processing, and elevation data. Ooh. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. Again, I would just ask everybody who's online to mute yourself and to hide your video. With that, Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I just got out of the trivia contest, which was hilarious, so that's always fun. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to talk about my experience over the past, well, I guess it's been a little over a year now, setting up a high availability ArcGIS server environment that we use to publish secured web services to one of the 911 organizations that we support. So I'm going to go over the HA environment, talk about the hardware, network, ArcGIS server, ArcGIS Pro, web service publishing, how we do the data updates and enhancements, some of the performance tuning that we've looked at, and some of the lessons learned. So I did put in the chat this link to the primary documentation that I followed in doing this. This consists of multiple single machine sites as opposed to a single multiple machine site. So why not just a multiple machine site? Because in this case, there's no sharing between the machines at all. Each machine has its own local ArcGIS server configuration store and server directories along with its own data. So we're using two servers here that you'll see. They're both independent of each other, which, again, there's no dependencies on each other. So if one goes down, the other one can still fulfill all the requests that it needs to, because we are in a 911 situation here, so it's very important that we maintain the services to that organization. Disadvantages, yeah, you got to keep everything in sync. Everything is exactly the same on all the servers. So what you do to one server, you do to the other server, and so on and so forth. It requires knowledge of your third-party load balancer. We're using an F5 load balancer, and there's the methods that we're using. And again, to reiterate, as I go through these slides, this is what's done on every server that we have going in this environment. So this is the diagram from every documentation. You can basically see at the top, you've got your clients on the outside world. You've got your load balancer that they're communicating with, and then it's distributing the requests between two web adapters, which then pass that on to your independent ArcGIS server sites. Now notice that the web adapters are optional in this case. But if we get to, this is what it looks like, and for us, in reality, we have to use those web adapters. You'll see two subnets that we've got in the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone. This is where the server environment lives. And it has no internet access, so there's specific methods that are required to access those servers, such as this client PC outside of the DMZ have to have a static IP in order to maintain, in order to be able to access that. That's a security thing. And the reason that we have to use these web adapters is another security protocol within the county, that they do not allow the F5 to communicate directly down into the application servers in the 9 subnet. So, yes, a little more work, but and potentially another point of failure, but that's what our security team forces us to do, so that's what we're doing in this case. Just a little bit of background on the hardware network. We're in a 100% virtual environment. All servers are virtual machines. As I said, we're using 2 ArcGIS, well, as you saw, we're using 2 ArcGIS servers and 2 web adapter servers. You'll see we abbreviate those as AGS and WA. These are pretty beefy servers, but this is our standard spec that we use for ArcGIS server sites. And this has just come from our experience of these hardware specifications pretty much handle everything we can throw at it. So we do use a secure domain account for accessing the ArcGIS servers, and we use a local admin account on each of the web adapter servers, and we've got 100 gigabit network going on behind the scenes. Secure domain account passwords change every month because they're a domain password, or domain account. The local admin account passwords never change. So we're going to get into some of the ArcGIS server software install notes and highlights. I haven't got all the steps documented here. I'm just hitting the highlights. I didn't want to spend a ton of time on, going through an ArcGIS server install. I'm just going to run through the highlights and some of the important things to note that we did during this, setting up this environment. Since everything is in the DMV and it has no internal network or internet access, all software installation packages and provisioning files and anything like that have to be copied to the servers themselves. And then we run all the software executables as the administrator. And then up front, we install the ODBC 17 drivers and the SQL Server native client. So a couple of things that we changed in terms of default installation locations is we changed things from the C drive to the D drive. Again, that's just from experience with setting up our other ArcGIS server environments. So in this case, the .NET extension dialog, we changed that. We also changed it for the Python installation. We used a ArcGIS server account. This is a one-time use, so we had an existing secure domain account that we used when we set up our open data site, so we just went ahead and used that for the ArcGIS server account, since it's only used one time. We do export the configuration file, although I haven't used it since we exported it, so, but it's probably still a good thing to keep just in case, and then we're ready to install. And then after it's installed, then we have to do the software authorization, which again, it doesn't have any internet access, so we can't take the easy route of just authorizing it against the Esri website. We have to actually spit out an authorization file. So we're going to pick this choice to authorize the Esri's website, the email, or at their website is what we're going to do. We make note of the ECP number for future reference if needed. And then we save this all out, and this creates the authorized.txt file on the server. And then we've got to copy that off of the server back onto a client that has internet access. We leave this dialog box open for now while we're going to the Esri website authorizing it. So we go to this website, we upload the authorized.txt file, and then once you're start that upload process. It will start a process, ends up downloading your authorization.ecp file, and then you can log out once you're done. And then we go back to, we put that file back on the server, and we finish this process. And then we continue by opening up the software authorization tool for ArcGIS server. This is, again, this is on the ArcGIS, one of the ArcGIS AGS servers that we have out there. And then you go through the process of browsing to that authorization.ecp file that you got. And then once that's authorized, you can open up ArcGIS Server Manager. You're going to see me use this server.domain instead of putting in what we really use, so you guys don't have that, can't get into our servers, even though it would be hard to anyway. But anyway, we create the primary site administrator account, and again, these same account credentials will be used on all the servers. Remember, everything's exactly the same on the two AGS servers. So we create our directories, our server directory and our config store on the D drive, and we finish that process, and then we can test. So test at every step that you can, make sure things are working when you proceed. This is just a test to make sure that you can get into Server Manager with everything you've set up. Because the next step, we're going to go through is setting up the token sharing for the secured web services. And this is the primary concept that both the AGS servers are going to use the same token encryption key, which is a primary piece of this puzzle that makes this work. Both of the AGS servers are using the same token encryption key, so any token that's issued by one server is valid for use on the other server. Down here at the bottom of the slide is just the word from the documentation about setting, the keys, set to 16 characters. Any characters beyond that aren't used. So basically, you just make up your own key, make sure you document it so you can use it on the other server, and then so that sets up the token sharing. You'll notice that we think the default for the short-lived token, 60 minutes. Consulting with the 911 vendor for the 911 organization that we're working with, they recommended we set the lifespan of the long-lived tokens to a year, and then they keep it on their radar that every year they have to go and retrieve new tokens for their application. Next thing we're going to do is set up the roles. And we're going to set up 3 roles, one for a user, one for a publisher, one for administrator. That's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to set up the ArcGIS server user account that the vendor's application is going to use to acquire tokens and authorize the web services that they're using against the ArcGIS or the AGS servers. So we're basically going to use the user role for this account, and then you're good to go with that. Again, create the same accounts on both the AGS servers. Good old SSL certificates. This is a long process. I didn't put, I could have spent the whole hour just talking about the SSL certificate process, but basically we acquire a paid-for DigiCert SSL cert for the F5 to access the web adapter servers, and then we use self-signed SSL certs for each of the AGS servers, copy all the certs, we import them, we bind them. We do some more installation, we export the certificates, and then we import them on each of the AGS servers. We configure them, we configure ArcGIS server to use the certs, and then we test against, again, your server.domain using the 6443 port to bring up the ArcGIS server admin tool to make sure there's no certificate errors. And then we're good to go with the certificates. Again, it's a much longer and involved process. I've got it all documented, so if you're really interested in seeing that process, I can provide that to you. It's daunting. It's a little bit intimidating, but it was the first time I went through it, and you learn a lot about certificates and how these servers authenticate between each other and communicate with each other. So it's really pretty interesting. Then we install the software on the web adapters. Again, I don't have every step in the slide, but I will point out some of the highlights and things to pay attention to. We open these ports between the AGS servers and the web adapter servers. We add some references into the host files on each. When you first go in to do some more certificate binding, the DigiCert binding is there, so you remove that first. Then you bind the self-signed certs. And we'll get to the DigiCert rebinding again in a little bit. So once we start the web adapter software installation, go ahead and it's going to, at least in this case, I don't know if it does this in any case, it comes up and lets you know that, oh, there's some IIS components missing, so you just agree to let it proceed to install those missing components, and then everything's typically good. And then as we go through, we're going to use the 443 port. We're going to use ArcGIS as our name, and then we're going to do the installation. Once the install's done, then it's time for configuration. We're configuring ArcGIS server. In this case, you're going to enter in, again, the server name, that domain, and the 6443. And then you're going to configure it, and then you should get this. Oh, I forgot to blur out one here. I thought I caught them all. Anyway. And then you're going to get this message that your server has been configured with your ArcGIS, your AGS server has been configured with your web adapter server. And then test again. And then here's where you test this to make sure that the services come up from the web adapter. Then you rebind the DigiCert to each web adapter server, and then you can test that DigiCert domain URL, test it both internally on the web adapter servers and externally from the outside to make sure everything's functioning. So then we roll along to the ArcGIS client software installation. You'll notice that I had to install both Pro 2.5, and I also had to install Desktop 10.7.1 because there's a bug in Pro 2.5 that doesn't allow you to publish locators as web services. So at that point, 2.6 wasn't out when I started this, so I just went ahead and bit the bullet and installed ArcMap 10.7.1 so I could publish the locators. Again, all the software installation packages, provisioning files, all that stuff gets copied to the servers for execution. On as the administrator, the ODBC 17 drivers and SQL Server native client were previously installed with ArcGIS Server, so we didn't have to do that prior to this. And then the software authorization process was the same as we did for ArcGIS Server, with the exception that the downloaded authorization file you get back from Esri's website as a .respc extension instead of ECP. And we did a little data prep. We're storing all of our data and sourcing all of our data from a file geodatabase due to the portability and the system independence. We're going to have to set up an enterprise geodatabase environment for this, so it's just a much more straightforward and easy way to go, and it's handles data updates pretty easily as well, as we'll see. So we created some directories, some standard directories on our ArcGIS servers. We use the GDBS directory. That's what houses the file geodatabase containing all the layers. And then the ArcGIS Pro Projects directory houses the Pro Project for each individual layer to be published. And this was the preference of the vendor that we use, that we publish each layer as its own service. So as I think back on that, I probably could have done that with all layers in a single project. I'm not positive of that, but the route I took at that point was to just create a pro project with a single layer in each project and publish the map, basically. We need to register the data store with ArcGIS Server. Since we're using file geodatabases, the GDB directory will be registered, so we're using a folder registration. And we'll give it the name, we'll give it the path, and then the server name that we're publishing on in this specific. We'll create that data store, and then here you'll see the name we gave it, and then you want to validate it, and after the validation, you want to make sure you've got the green check mark, all is good. So at that point, you've got your data store set up, and we're ready to finally publish some data. So using Pro for this part, we're going to open one of the Pro projects. First thing we got to do is establish our ArcGIS server connection. So at least in Pro 2.5, you just right-click somewhere in the gray area in Catalog, and you'll get a menu that pops up, and you'll pick the new ArcGIS server connection. You'll enter in that server name and the port 6443, and then you can. And then that's all you do at this point, and then you just pick OK. And then once it establishes the server entry, then you right-click on that, go to the properties, and then you establish the proper connection to do your data publishing. So you can use either publisher or an admin connection. Either one works. I use the admin connection all the time because that's just what's stuck in my mind, and figure if you can use the admin, be an administrator, you might as well do it. So continuing on, once you've got the connection set up, then again, to publish basically the map in this case, because it's only got a single layer, you right-click on the server, you go to publish, you publish the map service, you pick that you're going to publish the map in your project, and then you pick the map again, and then you pick OK, and then you come up with your Publish Map Service tool in Pro. First thing you want to do is analyze and make sure you don't have any errors that come up. First time I did this, it came up with the error that the data source was not registered with the server, which was curious because we just went through all that process of creating the data store and registering it. So I'm not sure what happened here, but luckily if you just pick the option and register the data source with a server and just give it all the same information you did in the Server Manager, it works just fine and registers it, and then you're good to continue publishing. So there's a few different areas here for publishing. Under the general area, you input the name of your service, give it a summary, put some tags in. We're referencing the registered data. We're not copying data to the servers. And then you put in your folder, your service folder name that you want created. Pop over to the configuration area, and we're doing map services, so we're going to edit those next. Under there, we've got 3 areas that we've got. Well, there's a couple that we're going to configure, but there's 3 there. One of the first things we do is we check this box is checked on. This allow per request modification is checked on by default. We check that off. We don't want users to modify the layer order or the symbology. And then under the parameters option of the configuration, you want to drop down the advanced option and turn off enable schema locking. That's, again, this is from experience. We don't want to have any schema locking going on because we all know what schema locks can do to our lives. Set your time zone and then move on. Move it over to the pooling configuration. Nothing, we didn't change anything there. Left that at the default. Moving over to the content option. That just shows you how it's going to look once it's published. Everything looks good there. It's always good to analyze again. Make sure nothing that you set is causing any issues. This is what you want to get back. No errors and warnings found, and then you're good to publish. And you're done. So you just do that for each. In this case, did that for each of the pro projects to get each of the layers published. In terms of publishing the locators, again, had to use ArcMap at that point, created some standard directories for these. Going into ArcMap, this is how you make the server connection in ArcMap. Pretty similar to Pro in terms of the dialog boxes. And we're going to create a connection folder to that locator area that we created. Moving along, now we're ready to publish the locators. And once we've got those locators created and they're located in the area that we created for them, now we can publish them. If you right-click on it, share as a geocode service, and then you go through somewhat of the similar dialogue, choose your connection, give your service name, create your folder, and then you can configure this stuff. The only thing that we configured was the general area. All the other categories we left with the defaults. And then once you input that, go ahead and analyze, and then you'll get this back, which is all standard warnings and messages. For locators, everything gets copied to the server in this case. So that's just something to be aware of. I imagine that's the same if you publish in Pro, but at least from our experience in publishing locators, this is just fine. We just move on. We've got the locators published now. Now we can go in and secure the web services. So we use ArcGIS Server Manager, and what we're going to do is you go to your managed services and you go to your target service, you pick the little padlock by it, brings up the dialog. It automatically defaults to public. So you want to switch that to private, and then you want to add the roles that are allowed to use that service. So basically just added all 3 roles that we created. And you do that just by picking the little plus sign by each role name, save those, and then you basically secured that web service. So you do the same, you go through the same process for every service that you published. Okay, so so we've got all our services published. The data's out there, it's being used. How do we update that data now? So as you recall, we've got 2 ArcGIS servers sitting out there. We've got 2 web adapters. So the approach that we take currently is we shut down access to 1 pair of web adapter and ArcGIS server, and we do that by, number 1, we'll monitor the ArcSoc processes on the ArcGIS server. Once those settle down and fall off the radar, we'll have the web adapter server open and the services open on that, and we're ready to stop IIS, which is the Worldwide Web Publishing Service. So we'll do that. And then once IIS is stopped, we'll go back to the ArcGIS server and stop the ArcGIS server service. And what that allows us to do is then replace that file geodatabase with a new one that's got updated layers in it. So we first make a backup copy, and we delete the current one, copy in the file geodatabase with the updated layers, and then we start the ArcGIS server service again, and that enables all the services and updates all the services with the new layers. And then we have to rebuild the locators. So before we can do that, we need to go into ArcGIS Server Manager and shut down all the locator web services. So this just goes through that process of just picking all the stop buttons for those locators. Once that's done, we can fire up ArcMap and then go into those locators and rebuild each one of those. You only need to rebuild the non-composite locators, because composite locators are just referencing the base locators that you created. You notice we've got a few different ones. The 2 parcel address locators are a variation on what's used for the city code. In one, we're using Zip City, and the other, we're using MSAG communities. MSAG is a 911 term for Master Street Address Guide. There's a little bit of difference between the 2, so we've been playing around with which one produces better results for the end users. And then we have a street address locator for those addresses that we don't have an address point for, get geolocated along a street. So we rebuild all those locators. Once they're all rebuilt, we can go back into ArcGIS Server Manager, restart all the services for the locators. It's important to start them in the order you restart the base component locators first before you start the composite locator. Forgot to make a note of that, but something to be aware of. And so that basically updates all our data. We've got the layers updated, we've got the locators rebuilt, we're good to go. If there are data changes, there are data changes in some cases that require web service republishing. That's schema changes, symbology changes, any labeling changes or scale dependencies that you change. And so basically, you do that within the ArcGIS Pro project, and then you overwrite the service that you've already published by basically navigating down from the server that you're connected to, get to the service folder, and then open that up, and then right-click on the service and pick the overwrite, and then it basically opens up the same dialog that was used when you published the service. So you go through the same, you basically analyze it. I'm type A personality, so I always check all the settings again to make sure nothing's changed. Analyze it, and then go ahead and republish it, and that overwrites the service that was originally published. Then then you're done and you can restart the worldwide IIS on the web adapter server again. Okay? And then basically you alternate and do the same thing to the other pair of the web adapter server and the AGS server. Do it all over again. So fortunately, we only have 2 servers in this configuration. If you had more, it would take a little bit more time. So let's talk about some performance tuning that we've looked at. There's a lot of settings in ArcGIS and ArcGIS Server Manager. I showed you the ones that we dealt with. We didn't touch any of the other ones. We're not sure that we need to. That whole "if it's not broke, don't fix it" mantra. But it's working. I've consulted with other staff that have set up ArcGIS server sites. They haven't really pointed out anything else that they've configured specifically in ArcGIS Server Manager. I reached out to the 911 vendor. They're not aware of anything else, but there's an awful lot. If you go through all the different tabs and buttons and settings, there's a lot of, I documented all that just to come back to at some point and go and reevaluate that and go, would this be something that would help us or not? The locators, as we all know, score settings have an effect on the results and functionality within the end user application. The vendor is currently evaluating potential enhancements. One of them that just came through is they've asked if we could include the state and country attributes in our data. That'll help them do forward geocoding within their application for whatever reason, but I mean that's a pretty easy thing to do. We're going to do that for this week's update. I'll mention we do these updates every Friday morning between 8 and 9, and we are working to automate this whole process. There's some interesting challenges in this, and one example is the fire hydrant layer is a layer maintained through ArcGIS Online. So we have to script that process of downloading that layer from ArcGIS Online, projecting it into the right coordinate system. It's all doable. It's just getting staff resources to start working on that and putting it all together in an automated fashion. And then testing of that's going to be super interesting as well. One thing I should mention is that we don't have a test environment for this since it's in the DMV. We haven't taken the steps to try and set up a test or development environment for all this. So basically, some of the testing we've done is using the same methodology we do for the data updates. We shut off access to one of the server pairs, do our testing, see if it works. If it works, get ready to do the same thing on the other server pair. So follow that same methodology. A little bit of risk taken in there, but it's been, the environment is set up, it's been working well, it's been pretty bulletproof. There haven't been too many issues. So lastly, lessons learned. Obviously, I want to upgrade to Pro 2.6 and republish the locators with Pro so I can do it all within one client application as opposed to having to use ArcMap. I've been a Pro user for probably close to 3 years now. So it was somewhat difficult for me to go back and use ArcMap because I didn't remember a lot of things, how to do that same stuff on ArcMap. But fortunately, a lot of the dialogue's the same between Pro and ArcMap, so I got through it. We had the vendor was experiencing some issues with intermittent token authentication failures on their end. So we were wondering if we had an issue where if the token got issued from one of the AGS servers, was it truly working on the other AGS server? And so we came up with a relatively simple test for that by first having the vendor, we did this live, with the vendor. We had the vendor acquire a token from the full system, meaning, all the servers were up. They generated a token through the F5, and then we alternately disabled each one of the server pairs and had them test that token. And that was successful. So that showed us that the token is indeed working for both ArcGIS, AGS servers. So that was good news for me, not so good news for them, because that's an issue that they have to deal with on their end. But what we did notice in some of their testing, they had some cool, fancy tools they were using to trace all this stuff as they were doing it. We noticed that some of their requests were coming through with no token all of a sudden. The token disappeared. We joke. There was a great Dilbert cartoon where he goes into his boss's office and his boss says his computer's not working, and Dilbert says, "It looks like you've lost your token." And next thing the boss is crawling around under his desk looking for the token. So I always quip that it must be lost in the Ethernet somewhere. So with that, that's what I have for you today. Good. So we've got some time left for questions. I actually finished right on time, so I'm happy I didn't include all that SSL certificate process. So we would have never finished on time.
So thanks for the presentation, Steve. You can see the 4 questions there in order.
Yeah.
I think Bo was the first one to ask, how long does it take to complete the project? Was any outside consulting service involved in the project?
So no, we did not have any. I used all staff resources. We have a wonderful staff. A lot of this came from our setting up our Pima Maps environment, which uses a 4 AGS server site. That's actually a 4-server site itself. That's where I got on to using file geodatabases for that, because that's what they use, and their experience has been very good with that. So that sent me down the path of using the file geodatabase approach for the data. We also had set up our open data portal in the DMZ, so I gleaned a lot of that experience from staff. I was involved with that somewhat as well. Gleaned a lot of that experience for setting up the environment in the DMZ and all the certificate stuff that we went through with that. So it was probably, in terms of time-wise, it was probably 3 to 4 months of my time. And obviously I didn't spend 100% on it because I have to do some management here and there as well. Off and on, probably 3 to 4 months to get it all set up and running. It takes some time to, once you get put the server requests in, it takes some time to get those stood up. It takes a day or 2 to get the certificates back and stuff. But it was a lot of fun. You want me to just go through the questions, Jeff?
Sure. Shawnee was the second one.
Yeah, so data replication, it's so what I do manually right now is basically there's a group of layers in that master file geodatabase that I basically kill and fill every Friday morning. So I import them in from our enterprise geodatabase. And then I talked about the hydrants layer that I download from ArcGIS Online, and then basically do another kill and fill process in the file geodatabase. There's a little bit of geoprocessing that goes on with the address points. We overlay the ESN community boundary layer that we have, and that populates the MSAG communities into that one. There's going to be a little more geoprocessing with that one. As I mentioned, we're adding the state and country fields into that. The really great thing about Pro, if you haven't taken advantage of the history, it's fabulous, because all I have to do is go click on the history and rerun and it brings the tool that I used before, brings it up with all the same inputs. I just got to rerun it. I don't have to re-input anything else. So using that history in Pro is amazing. So yeah, so not necessarily, I mean, that's basically the data replication right there. We just do a kill and fill process. No transactional type replication or updating or database replication, because we're not using a database, we're using file databases. So it makes it, so again, that makes it a little easier. I see Brian, have you considered completing these via code? Yes, as I just went through. In terms of using FME, that may be something we look at. We've been playing around with FME a little bit. We had one of our expert Python programmers look at FME, and because we have an awful lot of Python processes that run at night that update data in our enterprise geodatabases and sling data all over the place out into the DMZ for our open data portal and such. So yes, that's a good thought to look at using FME for that. Let's see. Next question from Larry Prentice about we had good success performing version updates without having a test environment. We haven't done any version updates yet, so that is going to be something that we have to approach, and I'll definitely be approaching that with Pro for sure. So that's a good question, and we'll see how that works out. Again, I think it's going to take that approach of shutting down access to one server pair, doing the updates, switching access on, switching access off the other one, do the same update. So we may, I will probably, and this has kind of been one of my goals, is to set up a single server, just an ArcGIS server in the DMZ that I can use as a test server for stuff like that, just to get the process down for doing version upgrades and stuff like that. Let's see, Portal. We did not install Portal. We're not using Portal, just straight ArcGIS server. And I don't think I mentioned we're just using a standard license level because we're just publishing services with it. So definitely as often. Are you using ArcGIS Monitor? We're not. We have access to ArcGIS on ArcGIS Monitor through our ELA. I think the first place we want to cut our teeth on that is with our Pima Maps environment. Monitor may be a better tool for looking at the processes to know when things have cleared off one of the AGS servers, so we know we can shut down access to that server pair. We talked to some of our IT folks that manage the F5, because that was one of my curiosities was, well, can we have the F5 tell it to say once you see no more processes or all the requests have been processed by this AGS server, can that trigger that you shut off access via the F5 to that web adapter and AGS server pair, instead of us, again, manually looking at the ArcGIS SOC processes, the AGS SOC processes. But they kind of indicated that would be a manual process too. That's not something that can be scripted. There's the research. There's this ArcGIS server health checkpoint. That I think that's more for the F5 to utilize if the server's in a good state to send a request to. So I'm not sure if that would work along those lines of letting us know when all the requests have been cleared and don't let any more requests, say at this point, don't let any more requests go through and let us know when all requests have cleared from that ArcGIS server so we can go ahead and shut down access while we do the updates. John letting us know we can run Python inside an FME workspace as well. Jeff, can you provide documentation? We really want documentation on the SSL search. I will definitely take note of that because I got it all step by step. So yeah, I can definitely provide that. We have cloud-based servers in the future. That's a good question. I'm not sure about that, but we base here in the county. We basically have built our own internal cloud with our virtual environment. But at times it depends on the CIO that you have, if they're a cloud fan or not. Some that we have not been cloud fans, others have. Our current CIO is great. By the way, he doesn't have any objections to us starting to test stuff in the cloud. There's some obvious stuff that would work well in the cloud. It would probably provide us a little better, what do I want to say, losing the term, but in terms of a little better stability, in terms of if a server goes down or if there's an issue, it would quickly switch over without losing anything. The other thing I forgot to mention is this is set up as a high availability environment IT-wise as well, in that we have a warm backup ready from both the web adapter servers and the ArcGIS servers ready so that it can quickly be restored if something happened and we had to go down that path. Let's encrypt SSL cert. I know nothing about let's encrypt SSL cert. Is that something different from DigiCert? Because I know DigiCert's the only one we had, and it was, I give credit again to our IT folks that deal with this. They've set up a really good self-serve system for requesting both DigiCert paid certificates and our self-signed certificates. It's all through an application interface that you just go through and put all the information in, and then you just check back in a couple days and the certs are ready to download. So it was really a pretty easy process for actually acquiring the cert. So how often do you update the file databases? Once a week, Friday mornings between 8 and 10 when you do those updates. So that's a pretty standard update cycle for 911 organizations for their data. Other organizations do it less often. If we had it automated and it ran well, we could do it every night, potentially. Oh, automatic renewal for the encrypt SSL. That's interesting. That's a good point. Thanks for that, Bo. Did I miss any questions?
That's all that I'm showing.
Okay.
Well, Steve, thanks again. That was awesome. Pretty in-depth, but
yeah,
I think that's what we all showed up for.
A deep dive into it. I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it. That was one of my goals, was to learn ArcGIS server and how to set it up, configure it, and publish web services. So that check that off my list. Now we just got to get all the data updated and automated. That'll make our lives much easier as well.
Okay.
Well, thanks everybody.
I forgot, but if anybody needs the link, here's the link to the survey. Please take the survey. And I think coming up next, I don't know what's coming up next.
Hospitality suite.
Hospitality suite. I guess it is 4:30, so that's the last thing in the day. Thanks, and we'll see everybody tomorrow or tonight.